guys, we are in a series called Explained, where we are looking at the Bible. What is this thing? What's the purpose of it? How do we read it? And does it really make a difference in our lives here and now? And last week we talked about how the goal of the Bible, the whole purpose, is to get to know God better. That when we read it, it's supposed to help us to understand God. And we talked a lot about how we can understand the Bible better when we understand Jesus, because Jesus brings us clarity and understanding, because the story of Jesus is the main point, the main story that all the other stories are really directing us to. But that can get confusing because when we read the Bible, it doesn't always seem to be specifically talking about Jesus, or Jesus isn't even mentioned some parts. So what do? How do we actually then read the Bible? Well, that's what we're going to talk about this week. So I want you to imagine that you're walking down the street and you pick up this random piece of paper. You open it up and realize it's a note. And it says, stop being a jerk. I already apologized. Can you just forgive me already and stop ignoring me? What would you think of that note? Would you think, oh man, how am I being a jerk? Who am I being a jerk to? Who am I ignoring right now? Oh gosh, who's mad at me? Would you think that? No, you would just think, I stumbled across some note that was written for somebody else. It's probably about two different people, they're friends, they had a relationship, and now they're fighting. You would think about the fact that there's a context behind this story and understand why it was being written. But here's the thing, sometimes that's not how we read the Bible. Sometimes when we're reading it, we forget that there's a context like that note, and we start reading it and we just grab a verse and think, that's maybe what it means. Maybe we assume that's how we're supposed to respond. We assume that's the meaning. In fact, we're doing a lot of guesswork with the Bible, which totally makes sense why a lot of us, we get confused when we're reading the Bible. But here's the thing. If the Bible is supposed to help us to know God better, then we want to be careful not to do a lot of guesswork, because that means we're sort of doing some guesswork and understanding who God is. And when we don't put these stories and these pieces of writing that we're reading into a larger context, we're missing the bigger picture, and we might even miss out on who God actually is. That's why when we're studying the Bible, we need to first look at the context, because when we figure out the whole context of what was going on, why it was written, what was happening during that time, then we can understand the meaning, the true meaning, and then that leads us to understand the response from us. How do we respond to what we just read? You see, we need to understand that the Bible has its own context. It's made up of 66 different books, and they're all very different and written in different styles and used for different purposes. I mean, think about it. If you go to the library and you get this huge stack of books, would you read these all the same? I mean, I've got poetry. I've got this really cool Harry Potter story, which you can get some lessons in there, but it is not necessarily a real story. Comic book, the Declaration of Independence, and an encyclopedia of animals. I mean, when you read these, you know that these are different types of literature. You understand that you read them in a different way. Well, in the same way, when we read the Bible, we have to think the same thing. We have to ask ourselves, what are we reading? You see, context matters. It changes how you read and understand what you're actually reading. Let's read Luke 1, verses 1 through 4 together. This is what it says. Many have undertaken to draw up an account of the things that have been fulfilled among us, just as they were handed down to us by those who were from the first were eyewitnesses and servants of the word. Therefore, since I myself have carefully investigated everything from the beginning, it seemed good also to me to write an orderly account for you, most excellent Theophilus, so that you may know the certainty of the things you have been taught. So what I love about this is it's really clear why Luke wrote this. He explains it right here that these are orderly accounts. He researched, he documented people who really encountered Jesus and wrote it down to give it to a person named Theophilus to help this person to be solid in their faith, to really know without a shadow of a doubt, these things happened. It's been investigated. It is true. Now, when we go to read the Bible, sometimes we may not know the account, what's happening. It may not feel so direct like this when we read it. And so we can use other tools. A lot of our Bibles even have some study tools in there that you can look at that can explain who's the author, why was it written. You can also use the Bible Project videos online. I love their videos. You can listen to their podcast, but literally on YouTube, if you're going to go and read from a book, go on there and watch their video first about that book and then read. So for instance, if we were reading Luke, we could go watch their video about Luke and then read from the book of Luke. So now I want to give you another example. I'm going to read for you. This is Philippians 4:13, and you may have heard this verse, and maybe you've heard it talked about a little bit differently. I can do everything through him, through Christ, who gives me strength. Now, when you read this, you might go, this is awesome. This is like a genie in the Bible. I can do anything I want with Christ. You may think, oh, I can get an A on a test without studying, or I can get a part in the play without even practicing or even having talent. That would be cool. Or I can get a job. I don't even have to try. It'll just land in my lap. That is awesome. Or I can do this new trick on my skateboard even without practicing. That would be amazing. Now, that seems like that's what this verse is saying, is that you can do whatever you want. You have these awesome magical powers because Christ is giving you the strength to be able to do those things. But if we actually look at the context, this verse actually reads a little bit differently. Paul was actually in jail when he was writing this. And this is actually a letter written by Paul to a group of people living in Philippi. And he's writing them to encourage them and even to thank them for sending gifts to him to help him. And he's letting them know he's okay even though he's imprisoned because of his faith. And when you read the verses surrounding it, he actually says, I'm actually content no matter what my situation is. I'm content whether I'm well fed or whether I'm feeling hungry. I'm content whether my situation is good or bad. I'm content whether I have a lot or whether I feel like I have nothing. And why? Because he has such a good relationship with God. It's that he's getting his strength from Jesus. You see, when we read the context of that verse, do you see how it completely changed the verse? We see this context gives us a different picture and understanding of that verse so that we can see the meaning says that we can be content, that we can be content with Christ no matter what our situation is, that we can have strength and peace from God no matter when we're in a bad situation or a good situation, whether we get what we want or we feel wanting. And that leads us to maybe turn to God, to trust God no matter what our situation is. Do you see how we learned the context and then it gave us new meaning and then it leads us to know how to respond? So here's the bottom line. Context creates clarity. Instead of us getting overwhelmed and frustrated and just giving up on reading the Bible, I want to challenge you to spend more time with it. Learn how to read it. Learn how to understand it. And that's why at Youth Group, we gave you guys these little bookmarks, these explained bookmarks. On the back, we listed a bunch of questions that can help you to figure out the context of what you're reading. And at the top, we even wrote down context, meaning, and response so that you remind yourself that when you listen to the context, when you get the full context of what you're reading, it'll help you to understand the meaning. And then it'll help you to know how to respond. You see, we really do believe that the Bible changes us. It can change us. Are you willing to put in the work to find out more about this God who says that he loves you, that he says he'll never leave you, that we're all talking about how good and amazing he is? Hey, we'd love to continue the conversation, so join us this week at Youth Group.